Good morning, everyone, to all who are present here today. After yesterday's riveting sessions with Ms. Anjum Katyal and Ms. Gulen Kriplani, who had focused on the dynamics of language at the interpersonal and societal levels, today on day 2 of Dialogue 2, we shall focus on global perspectives and how the usage of language as a vessel of empathy can bring about a revolutionary change in the realms of our social existence. As our first resource person today, we have among us Miss Aishwarya Mukhopadhyay, an Oxford scholar who has recently completed her MPhil on social anthropology. She specializes in material and visual culture and will be throwing light on the language of protest and propaganda to provide us insights about past and present initiatives of historical importance. And so, before I request Aishwarya to take over and proceed with her session, Languages of Resistance, I just want to inform everyone gathered here today in this session that this session is being live streamed on YouTube. Aishwarya, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Aishwarya's session will begin at 9:30. We will take a short break until then.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here, and I was a student here, so it's really nice to be back and quite an honor to speak at the 70th year of Modern High. I was there in school when we celebrated the 60 years, so it's really an honor. So I want to speak to someone who's organizing. I have 2 laptops and I will be presenting through one and I'll be speaking through this. So if you could please give me access to share my screen. I have 2 names and Aishwarya Mukhopadhyay.
You have access.
to share
I
your
do.
screen from both.
Okay, thank you so much.
Aishwarya, you can take a little time to set it up because we are still a little ahead of time. So you can take 5 minutes to settle down and begin at 9:30.
all those who are gathered here, we are now present with Ms. Aishwarya Mukhopadhyay, who will be conducting her session. Over to you, Aishwarya, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As I was saying, great to be back and great to such an honor to be called here today. So I'll just share my screen, and if someone could just tell me if they can see it. Yes, we can see it.
Yes, ma'am. We can see.
Hi. Little bit about me. I'm Ishwarya, and I graduated in 2016, so roughly 5 years ago. And I then studied history at Stephens Delhi. And then I went to Oxford to do my MPhil in social anthropology. I largely work on visual and material culture, which means I work on material objects, and especially historical objects and objects which have been there for a very long time, and kind of understand the social biography, what the object was about, and the other complexities surrounding objects. Right now, I'm starting my PhD journey at Oxford, so I'm very excited. This week is my first week of classes, and I really look forward to the journey ahead. Today, I'm going to actually be talking about the languages of resistance. And I want to talk to you about this in a global perspective. So I'll be giving a very short lecture on how I think about it. And after that, we can go over some questions, and then I'll ask you some questions perhaps to see how you envisage languages of resistance. Now, you see, being trained as an anthropologist, empathy becomes a crucial facet of our discipline. We as a group study people or communities and often end up learning about their problems. And anthropological writing is thus often empathetic. Anthropologists usually study communities which are not theirs, and I think a lot of you may be aware of that. Anthropologists write about tribes, etc., at least traditionally. And often, as we have seen in our colonial history, we usually had a lot of British or European anthropologists writing about the Indian people. And even today, a lot of anthropologists choose to do fieldwork overseas. While different societies have unique facets, you'll not be surprised actually by how similar these global problems are today, because we live in an interconnected and globalized world. There is often discrimination, as you know, in terms of access to resources, denial of dignity, or discrimination based on personal belief. Thus, while we may look different, we speak different languages, we are all part of some power structure, really, where I think we are either discriminating or being discriminated against. However, we are always there within that dynamic. So where there is discrimination or unequal treatment, there is a lack of empathy, right? And discrimination of any kind stemming from this kind of apathy of a party usually leads to resistance. So today's brief lecture will focus on the languages of such resistance, which is based on an unequal power dynamic and lack of empathy across the globe. And through the next 40 minutes, I want to understand how people have articulated resistance through language and what it has meant for the resistance movements. While in this lecture, I just want to clarify one small thing. Today I'm only discussing the written word. When I mean language, I'm only talking about written language. But language can actually be expressed through art, music, or even gestures. And it is perhaps a part you all could go and explore and research further. Right. So let us begin somewhere very close to home. Imagine it's the early 20th century and the Indian subcontinent has been protesting for freedom from British rule. You know, you have protests all over the country, what we see in the early 1900s. And you, of course, see the monumental figure of Gandhi, who has gained an insane amount of popularity throughout the nation. But today we are not so concerned with Gandhi in today's lecture. Rather, I want to spend a bit of time talking about another man. We want to talk about Ambedkar today. And he was born in the Mahar caste in 1891 in what would be known as modern-day Madhya Pradesh. To me, he's actually my favorite scholar. To me, Ambedkar's story remains quite poignant and sad because of the discrimination he had to face his entire life. But this remains, as you know, a truth for so many thousands of Dalits and lower castes in India and the world even today. And while we are all aware of Ambedkar's trajectory, what I wish to highlight is his political thought, which was evident in the speeches he gave and the articles he wrote during this period. So let us think about Ambedkar. Now, what did Ambedkar really say? I mean, he said a lot of things. We have whole books written on him. But to me, what really, comes off very strongly when I read Ambedkar is, to him, fraternity becomes the most important value, which is often underrated and overlooked. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have studied political science, and I hope a lot of you are reading political science in 11 and 12. And perhaps you would agree that there is a lot of focus on liberty, equality, but perhaps not as much on fraternity. But to Ambedkar, fraternity becomes the most important of the three strung together words: liberty, equality, fraternity. And as you know, liberty, equality, fraternity became very revolutionary as an idea after the French Revolution in 1789. Ambedkar said that without fraternity or an understanding of brotherhood, there can be no liberty and equality, and hence no democracy. So liberty, equality, fraternity become democracy, right? But without fraternity, Ambedkar says, there can be no democracy. Discussing this, Ambedkar wrote, and I read out the quote: "My social philosophy may be said to be enshrined in three words: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Let no one, however, say that I have borrowed my philosophy from the French Revolution. I have not. My philosophy has roots in religion and not in political science. I have derived them from the teachings of my master, the Buddha. In his philosophy, liberty, equality had a place, but he added that unlimited liberty destroyed equality and absolute equality left no room for liberty. In his philosophy, law had a place only as a safeguard against the breaches of liberty or equality, but he did not believe that law can be a guarantee for breaches of liberty or equality. He gave the highest place to fraternity as the only real safeguard against the denial of liberty or equality. Fraternity, which was another name for brotherhood or humanity, which was again another name for religion." And I think it's a very powerful quote, because what he says is that our focus really has been wrong. While we are discussing, and political theory can go on, and philosophy can go on about what is liberty, what is equality, really what we must ask is, are the people around us really fraternal? Are they ready to accept the other as an equal and fight for them? And this is the very strong point Ambedkar brings out, which really resonates with me and has been for many years now. And Ambedkar, of course, as you can see, was greatly inspired by Buddha. And I think that says a lot about Ambedkar and the philosophy and how well read he was as a scholar. Now, while discussing Ambedkar, another point that usually comes to my mind is, discussing the human body. Now, what is the human body? Why am I discussing the human body? Because this theorist who you see on your left is known as Michel Foucault. He was a French philosopher of the largely 20th century, and he remains very popular. He's one of the most fashionable philosophers, if you may say so, today. So Foucault theorized that the body, the human body, is a site of both violence and a site of resistance. Take, for example, the indignities which is hurled towards the Dalit body. And I think there has been a lot of public discussion about this, how Dalit bodies, how Dalit people are treated differently, right? So it leads to Dalit people, for example, having a radically different lived experience, which is worth thinking about. So for example, within a neighborhood or a community, the Dalit experience will be radically different and perhaps violently different, from the experience of other castes. And it is the very Dalit body, which is again at the forefront of the movement for the emancipation of Dalits against the cruelty, against the indignity, which the communities have suffered for centuries and maybe millennia more. And let's go to the slide for a second. The picture on the right, actually, Foucault talked about the body in terms of discipline and punishment. He says that because of the rules that we have in society, the rules essentially discipline our bodies and make us subservient to something. So in a similar way, Dalit bodies have been, for example, disciplined. So not going to the temple, not going to the same well to drink water, not staying in the same place where Brahmins are staying. These are all the ways through which Dalit bodies have been disciplined. And today we'll not just talk about Dalit bodies. I also want to talk to you about the female body and the body of color. A moment which I personally witnessed with great empathy and resistance was in 2012 during the protests that broke out in the aftermath of the Delhi rape case. I was 14, and until then, quite used to the headlines in the newspapers of women being raped all over the country. Nothing much ever happened, honestly, no outrage, nothing much. And it soon became like a legal matter. It was her fault, his fault, her fault, his fault. And we never heard of it after that. So it may have been a small part of the front page, but then it just went to the back of the newspaper, or it was just never reported. But then what happened on 16th of December 2012 hit the entire nation on a different level. And I remember this very clearly. As a young teen, I was suddenly listening to discussions, on women's bodies being sites of violence, unsafe spaces in all our cities, the lack of adequate lighting on roads. Apps started getting created for women's safety. You could just press a button and, the police would give you a call or somebody would come. New laws were being formalized, and more importantly, it was a landmark event because there was such an increased outrage about rape cases, and many more rape cases have been reported after that. According to statistics, around 30% more rape cases are reported after 2012 than before, right? So let's talk a little bit about the language of resistance here. The language of resistance in this case was radically different from other cases I had seen during my lifetime. And I'll give you a first-hand account of this. And I'm sure a lot of you were there. I don't know how much you remember. Till then, as I was saying, there was, I never seen something like this at that point. It remains one of the most landmark moments in modern Indian history because it formalized a pan-India public, which was for the first time digitally active. And it becomes very important, when you're digitally active. It signified the youth, the young, restless youth who were outraged, and honestly, the entire nation was shocked by the inhumanity of the crime. According to Google Trends Search Volume Index from 2012, Delhi gang rape in Delhi, and gang rape victim were the top search phrases in India in December 2012. These developments demonstrate how, in a time of national and international crises, social media contributed to Indian news reporting, and everybody became like a reporter. There was a lot sort of citizen reporting. Unlike print media, which kind of has like a deadline to report and write, social media is obviously more instantaneous, and you can instantly update on-ground events as long as you have a smartphone. And of course, people who have a smartphone read it. And while smartphones weren't that big a thing then, it was kind of growing. So what were some of the languages that were used to protest? So I've put some of them up. I'm sorry, but I should have given a trigger warning in case it triggers anyone. So the first is, which is Justice for Damini, Nirbhaya, Amanat, India's Braveheart. The second is The Rope, the Rapist. The third is a visual depiction of the penis in the shape of a sword with a caption that says "Castrate the rapist." And then the last one was "Hang the bastards." And the protests became actually sites for larger conversations around other events in India, with slogans disparaging the rapes of minorities in Kashmir, in Northeast India, and Dalits across the country. So what is this language? What is the change that we're seeing here? What we can see is that suddenly the human body, the female body, is at the forefront of the discussion, forefront of the protest. Till now, the female body was often violated, and we know, it was often violated. However, it is the first time that discussions were held so openly about the act of rape. There was more discussion on sex education, understanding the difference between male and female genitalia, and the experience. And most importantly, I think women were voicing how the experience of women were very different from men. So as I was saying, the lived experience, and this was reflected in the language of the protest and percolated into larger discussions in the Indian public sphere, both online and offline. I mean, it percolated right into our school. I remember we had a discussion about it, that what had happened and how heinous the crime actually was. Some conservatives, like in any other rape case, raised questions that why at all was Nirbhaya out late at night? Why with a male friend? It was the time, I remember, when women started raising their voice in protest to these questions nationwide, questioning the limits which were imposed on the female body. For example, the restricted mobility. So, you can link this to what Foucault said about, your body is being disciplined. Like, you don't go out after 8 o'clock. That's how you get disciplined. And eventually, of course, as you know, it led to new women-centric laws and is an example of the way the 2012 protests brought about a radical change in the lives of women throughout the country. While the laws as you know, need to be continuously improved and revised according to the present changing realities. Um, it was a giant leap from what was. And if it was the colonial laws on rape which were kind of active before 2012. So it was actually really problematic. They were problematic, the vaginal testing for rape, etc., which was really not done. And one can only hope that taking from this that we make more inclusive, more sensitive laws. And really, I would call it one of the triumphs that I have witnessed. Of course, not everything everybody protested for was granted or happened, but definitely there was a radical improvement in terms of legislature. As I'm speaking about the body, I cannot overlook the questions which have been raised about the colored body in the Western world today. We have come to acknowledge, as I've told you before, that everybody has a different lived social reality. So you live in the same place, your life can be radically different. And this perhaps gets highlighted best in the Black Lives Matter protest in America, which then spread throughout the world. And honestly, I personally, I have seen, while I was living in the UK, I have seen, differential treatments being meted out to people of color. I've heard it in some occasions. I've read about it, in the newspapers, etc. While I have been very lucky that I'm part of a very inclusive community and I have not faced it, it is not unknown to be facing this. Yesterday we had a session with Ms. Kriplani, and in one of the sessions it kind of came up about how children in international schools, children of color, face different discriminations of different kinds, whether it's from the teachers, whether it's from the administration, or sometimes whether it is from the peer group itself. But the Black Lives Matter protest actually began sometime in 2013. And I actually want to talk to you a little bit about how it started. And well, I hope you know the people in the four people that I am talking about. If not, no worries, I'm here. So on the left, you have Michael Brown. He was killed when he was 18. He was an unarmed Black teenager. Next on the right, you have Trayvon Martin. He was killed when he was an early teen, I think 12 or 13. Of course, we know George Floyd, and next to him is Breonna Taylor. And of course, it led, to radical protests. But I kind of also want to now talk about, the digital space and the kind of the trajectory it has taken in the Black Lives Matter protest, because it's an interesting way to view the Black Lives Matter protest. So I want to specifically talk about Michael Brown. And you see, on the afternoon of 9th August 2014, Black teenager Michael Brown was fatally shot by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, which is a small town in America. And I kind of rely from an article I read by two scholars, Vanilla and Rosa, and they write a really powerful article about it. I'm happy to share it. So anyway, as soon as Michael Brown died, and he was shot outside a market, at 12 in the afternoon, so literally in broad daylight by a police officer. Somebody tweeted, was living right next to it, that I just saw someone die, with an image of Brown's lifeless body. Before this, of course, as you know, we have examples of numerous unarmed Black teenagers being shot, most famous perhaps being Trayvon Martin. This incident naturally caused worldwide alarm. There was shock and protests, and it incurred a great digital footprint. So we're talking about 2014 and the footprint there. What was interesting is the hashtag which came up. There was a hashtag called Ferguson, which Bunilla and Rose talk about. Bunilla and Rose also talk about this hashtag, if they gunned me down. So essentially what was happening. So some news channels in the US were kind of trying to show the victim in a bad light. So essentially, people all over the US started protesting that, if we were gunned down, what kind of picture would the news media show, especially Black people? So you can see that most of these people, do jobs, do other things. There's so much to a human, but usually they assess that if indeed the news media would be taking their photographs, it could be taking somewhere where they look like a mobster, a gangster, a drug addict, a social deviant of some kind. And it became a very powerful moment. And so it's a juxtaposition of a proper versus an improper picture. And most of these improper pictures make you look like, literally the undertone of it would be, you deserve to die, you are not, a good citizen. And it becomes a powerful moment, I think, in US history, in US popular history, because it highlights the biases of the media while reporting and the image they often construct of the victim around controversial images. While there were in-person protests all over the country, some violent, some non-violent, it was the powerful tool of social media that united America and the world. The hashtag became a powerful tool and is still a powerful tool for protest. And if you think about it, it is actually a long-staying, almost permanent digital archive of the language of resistance. The hashtag remains relevant even today, especially in the renewed protests with the death of George Floyd. It was the hashtag that really connected the world. And if I quickly go to the previous picture, you can see the hashtags there. I cannot breathe, say his name, George Floyd. It's a movement for acknowledgement. It's a movement which demands something from authorities. It's really one of the most powerful movements that I have seen. Empathy unites, and with the Black Lives Matter kind of gaining ground, a new hashtag gained popularity in India, coming back to Ambedkar, Dalit Lives Matter. The world tried to really come together in solidarity. And I say tried for a reason. Here you have Dr. Suraj Inge, an excellent scholar, and he has this book called Caste Matters. He writes a lot. Follow him wherever you are active on social media. I'm a huge fan of his writing, really enjoy it. Suraj says very rightly, I think, solidarity is a form of co-ownership of time and space, while at the same time being cognizant of one's unique but commonly shared history. And India was also very, inspired by Ambedkar, of course. But what I want to say here is that this new, two things. First off, is that why did I say that? Why Dalits tried, people tried to come together. You see, the problem of caste is not just concentrated in India. Indians are all over the world. There's an entire diaspora, and studies have shown that that the caste. The outlook that caste is a way of living has kind of percolated even outside, and that kind of gets reinvented There's so many articles I'm happy to share with you, which kind of discuss how diasporic Indians also maintain caste while thinking of in terms of marriage, etc. And what India really tries to do, and India has a wonderful talk, I'll try to share the link of it later in the chat. He tries to kind of empathize and kind of show that, everybody is human. And very often, the indignities which are hurled at lower caste people in our country is very similar to that of what Blacks have gone through in the US, which is one of his arguments. And I think it is a very powerful argument if we kind of see it, oppression in that light. So as I told you that, we are all different, and, we speak different languages, we come here together, from all over India. But at the same time, there is something which is common about all of us. So you see, without empathy, there cannot be any real resistance. If you do not feel wronged by an act which was directed to another, we will not be able to resist to bring about change. And Ninde writes about this, that it is this feeling of, you've also been wrong, that empathizing, that understanding, that if you do not understand that, you are just, not that you can never be that involved in any resistance of any kind, any protest of any kind. You can't be a tokenistic, follower, or, you have to be active. And that active sense only comes from a deep sense of humanity. While writing the constitution, actually, of India, Ambedkar insisted on fraternity. And of course, many people, you can read about it in the constitutional debates. They kind of protested that why do we need fraternity? We have liberty, we have equality, and everything. Ambedkar insisted, knowing fully well that without fraternity, the feeling of oneness, the feeling of humanity, or, as we are talking about today, Ubuntu, India could never be a social democracy that was envisaged by the founding leaders of the country. So I end with this, that while different bodies have different experiences and realities, Ubuntu and resistance represents a solidarity for the sake of humanity and represents the existence of such a humanity. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them.
If anybody has any questions, please put it up in the chat box so that Aishwarya can address those.
Yes, somebody has their hand raised.
Yes, so it was really something very good to listen to, and I actually learned a lot. So you were mentioning that language of resistance can be enhanced with the help of social media or media in any form, but can it also repress the language of resistance as well?
Yeah, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that social media is a diverse space. Two things, and that there are so many people on social media. They have radically different views which are kind of coexisting, and for example, left and the right, literally, and you may fall somewhere within the spectrum. You may not identify fully with the left, you may not identify fully with the right, you may be somewhere in the middle, or you may be on the extremes. Now you see, it's also a matter of how social media perceives the reality for us. So you have algorithms, right? Which is actually something very telling about social media and the precarity of social media, because, for example, Facebook kind of tries to understand where you are leaning on the spectrum, and shows you posts just related to that. So in your head, maybe, oh wow, this movement is becoming really big, but it may not actually be becoming that big. But I think what social media does is that it gives you a space to really speak out. A, B, you can become accountable, as long as you don't delete the post. But even if you do delete, people usually have screenshots. It's an accountable space. People kind of counter question you. And the third most important thing is that it connects everyone. So the BLM was happening on one hand, and then, like as I was saying, the Dalit Lives Matter. And Dalit Lives Matter has been going on for a while, but it got some renewed interest in the popular Indian public's mind because of this. And we were also tweeting about BLM, all the way from India. And then, like, it triggered other movements, Roads Must Fall in Oxford, which I sort of witnessed. So it really, I think social media has the power to connect so much. But on the other hand, yes, it can repress, especially if there are laws, etc., in the country about, and also like the Facebook guidelines, like, what is against the community standards, what is not. So like that is also an important point. But I think it has a bit of both. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Rihanna?
Right. With a lot of these slogans, so the language of resistance is often very striking. And say, for example, if I take like a simple slogan like I can't breathe from the Black Lives Matter movement. So the language of resistance, so my question is basically, is the language of resistance more focused on, the spread of a message? Or is it just to like underline something that everybody knows? Because say something like I can't breathe, it's reliant on like a lot of context. Or is it both? So I just want to understand how the dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, it is a message. I mean, it becomes a slogan, I can't breathe. And like I said, like languages have some common features, like art, it has symbolic features. And I think that I can't breathe became so popular and so entrenched. First off, there was a very graphic video of, George Floyd, George Floyd, and it became part of popular culture, because it's such an inhumane, thing that happened that we can't imagine it. It's so inhuman, and I think that really struck with people. So it was just not the hashtag. The hashtag became popular because of that video being widely circulated. And then it became a symbol, really. I can't breathe. It became like not a symbol in terms of, the MHS logo, but a symbol in terms of what the movement really meant, because essentially it means that Black people cannot breathe. It resonated with so many people, so I think that is why I Can't Breathe became both a symbol, and it is at the same time, way that, this protest will be remembered.
Thank you.
Divya?
Yes. So I just wanted to ask that right now, a lot of language that we use in normal life is based on what we see on social media. We talk about awareness movements and other things that we are seeing on social media. So, can the pace in which language is changing because of social media affect socio-political movements drastically?
In what way do you mean language is changing? Could you give me an example?
Like, for example, right now, even when we converse, okay, or when we go and meet friends, we always tend to take pictures. Even if we have a fight with someone, we always tend to show that we are happy. So we have a different life for social media is basically what I mean to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
So do you think that the life that we have for social media will affect maybe our stand on certain social political movements, or maybe affect how the social political movements are being conducted?
Um, okay, that's an interesting question. I think yes, people are very different in real life and in social media. It's also the way social media constructs the space it is. For something like Instagram, which I research on, is entirely based on aesthetics. So nobody's going to read if you nobody's going to read anything you write, even if it's just a post with written language. Very few people actually do. um yes and no, in the sense that you see a lot of bloggers, fashion bloggers, for example, because that's who I work with. Fashion bloggers, will be writing about size inclusivity, this that, and they'll be talking about diversity in terms of sizes, etc. Or they will be discussing sustainable fashion, but they themselves will never follow that. you know I mean, each to their own, to their beauty standards, everything. But kind of acknowledging the fact that perhaps I also conform to beauty standards is something different than radically like saying, I do not conform, I do not endorse this, when in reality, in your own personal life, you are. So I think definitely, and I think blogging is a lot about that, for example, that you present a sanitized version of your life. So I think a lot of people are very sanitized on social media. They are also very politically correct, so it's also very tokenistic, social media, because oh, a fire is happening in some part of the world, everybody's putting it up on Instagram statuses. I should too, because I'll not fall within that grind. So I think a lot of people do. Um, i i feel we can be empathetic about a lot of things in the world, but sometimes it's also not humanly possible to know about everything. So I think social media is both, it's a learning space where, you get to learn, like the Amazon fires, which happened, I think, 2019 or early 2020. Newspapers weren't covering it at first. I first read it online, you know. So I think, yeah, it does have a space, after that, there was a lot of pressure on the Brazilian government to kind of do something. People were like putting in money, donating money to help stop the fire. So I think it has some space, the language of protest online. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but there is Mrs. Chandra, who asked a question on the chat. So may I first, talk about that? Can we have a language of resistance without the use of language? So maybe we can talk about Gandhi about this, because Gandhi was all about passive resistance, right? That you become completely passive, you don't talk. But as I said today before I began, that language can have different ways. You don't always have to speak. You can draw, you can have music, you can have art, you have actions, gestures, because we are all able in different ways. So yes, definitely, I think the biggest example is perhaps Gandhi. You don't speak much, you just go and sit down somewhere and you don't move, or you just not eat and you fast until death. So like, you just don't talk to anyone, you don't do anything, you just stop eating. So I think that is also a very powerful way of resisting, where you are kind of trying to evoke a humane response. It works sometimes, it doesn't work on other times. Humane response in for other from the opposition party who is in power. So I hope that answers your question, ma'am.
It does, ma'am. Thank you.
Please don't call me ma'am. This is very, I'm really not that. Okay, so I'll just go like how I see it. Brinda.
Good morning. My question was, as a student of anthropology, you know a lot about tribal resistance, tribal movements, basically, but they don't ever kind of reach a global scale. The max you would do is that what it would happen in Western countries, where a few select people would, talk about indigenous people in Canada or USA. Do you think for their movements to be globally recognized, is a language of resistance enough? Or do you think actions of resistance are even more important? What would it take for their movements to reach a global scale?
Okay, so let me talk about this first. I think there is a certain world order, the global north and the global south, which you can roughly see. And no matter what happens in the global north, we get to know about it, So even if it's, people from different communities resistant against the government in the global north, we do get to know about it. So, and this is also a fault, I feel, of our education system. For example, when I was a kid, I had to learn up all the airports in London. I mean, there are 4 airports. I don't know why I know that. But, it's irrelevant actually to us. I mean, how do I care how many airports are in London? Do the British people learn about how many airports there are in India or Delhi or Calcutta, or know the name of the airport in Calcutta? They don't, right? So I think this is a skewed relationship of the world order, where we get a lot of reciprocal knowledge about them than they get about us. But I think social media has at some point, tried to bridge that gap, because we are all global citizens at the same time. We are traveling. India is a very traveling country. We have a huge diaspora. And, while definitely some of the diaspora continue to, not sharing or not engaging with Indian news, I think a lot of people do. So that is how, a lot of protests, if you've seen about things happening in India are happening abroad. Like, I know from one Oxford, there are people, there are groups who are kind of continuously kind of trying to raise awareness within Oxford and UK in general, sending letters to the High Commissioner, etc. A lot of things are happening. I think there another reason why news of suppose our tribal resistance in our country does not reach out is also because we don't report it to our people. And perhaps this is, I don't know why this happens. Perhaps people don't want to report it. Perhaps it's too dangerous to report it. Perhaps it's too sensitive to report. There may be government directives. I'm not sure. But, if our people don't know, then where, and this is, I think, where social media is brilliant, because, you have on ground reporting. People who are literally there with a smartphone can type something and tweet it, and then it gets retweeted. And also a lot of owners in academia, to kind of bring these issues out. And as I was telling you, anthropologists, when we study people, we often come across their problems. So, we end up writing a lot about them. So, development studies, a lot of them aren't called anthropologists, but they're actually doing anthropological work. They're going to a community, they're going to a village and trying to understand what's happening. And through the writing, perhaps it's going to the global stage. But even then, perhaps it's a bit limited, because I feel academia stays within academia, actually. So yeah, it is definitely a problem that requires our attention. But I think there are some people who do cover, like, I really enjoy reading Caravan, the magazine. Like, they have a lot of interesting stuff which they keep on, right? There are other newspapers, like digital newspapers like Scroll, Wire, etc., who have op-eds, etc., from really good people, and kind of cover the on-ground thing. So that's great. Okay, next on my screen is Anushka.
Yeah, good morning. So my question is mainly, can the language of resistance be appropriated? And especially on social media, how can we as citizens make sure that we're spreading the language of resistance in a responsible manner and we're not appropriating it while doing so? And I'm mainly asking this question because I saw on Twitter a few weeks ago, there was this thread by a Black activist, and she mainly said that the phrase "say her name" was mainly a phrase used for Black women in the USA that went missing and were brutalized by the police in the US. And that the phrase had been circulated again, but this time it was being used for Indigenous women going missing in Canada because there's a huge problem over there as well. And so there was a lot of criticism from, Black activists and the Black community on social media. And so I think that definitely raised a lot of questions in my head about how the appropriation of languages of resistance can take place in social media. So I'm mainly interested in how to use this language in a responsible way.
I think you I mean you see, first we're talking about a community, right, which has been wrong. For example, Black women, a social group, if we can say. But then we're also talking about individuals who are using social media, and it's really not possible. Even statistically, for everybody to be responsible. I mean, that is having your hopes way too high. Because people again have different lived realities, they have a different education, they perceive things differently. How do you okay, it's an interesting question because I think reading is the most important thing, like actually reading and going through and kind of really critically thinking about that, what does this mean, what does this not mean. Personally, I have not really read about this problem with Canadian Indigenous women, etc. But what it seems like is that they were kind of inspired by that, and they're kind of using that hashtag. But perhaps a hashtag loses its original message and relevance, and that is perhaps the reason for protest. I'm not very sure. I'm not really. I haven't really read about it, but I think the most important thing, a friend of mine in Oxford, he told me, he is from America. He told me that, these conversations are like landmines, we haven't been speaking about these for so long that these conversations are like landmines. And even if you don't mean any harm, you may, step on the wrong place and it may blow up, and you may not intend it to, because, these conversations are so nuanced and there are so many people who have so many things to say about this. So I feel that we definitely need to read more before we post critically. Also, like, I feel we follow a lot of people, right, on Twitter, Instagram, blah blah, kind of seeing who, if the people we follow have any agendas. I mean, if they are affiliated to some organization, etc., some party, etc., they are, kind of understanding where this person stands. So if you kind of retweet someone, kind of also looking critically that what are they doing, why have they kind of written this? Because obviously, if, for example, a country's foremost maybe Indigenous woman champion kind of retweet something, a lot of people will retweet, but she may have her own reasons to retweet, which we may or may not know. So kind of using your discretion. And I think social media is a place where you need to use your discretion a lot, because it's all about data and information. So I think I always, about this talk, I was quite nervous actually, because, when I'm talking about the languages of resistance, it's like a landmine that I'm walking on. I may say the wrong thing, and if I have, I apologize for it. But it's also a conversation which we all need to be part of, and be respectful to each other and kind of, learn from it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Anvesha?
Good morning. So recently what I've seen on social media is whenever there is a rape of a woman and there are many posts coming out and awareness and everything, there's a hashtag which comes along with that nowadays, is what I've seen, is not all men, which neutralizes the entire effect and changes the focus on the main topic. So do you see this as a fallen part of social media, or why do you think this has happened? People are more sensitive or not empathetic enough to the main issue? Like, what is the
I feel there are a lot of good men out in the world. We may not always meet good men, when we are going on public transport or otherwise. But I think there are a lot of good men out there. But to all these people who say not all men, I retort, it's just enough men to make us feel uncomfortable, to make our mobility restricted. It's just enough to write all men. Because, yeah, I mean, I really don't, because I feel like that's just what needs to be said, that, you may not be, I'm not targeting you, but it may be your friend, it may be your cousin, it may be your brother, it may be your father, it may in the future be your son, you never know. So it's just enough men to actually, that's the problem. Yeah. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
And just one more thing. This actually is a way which it shifts the entire focus from the main topic. So it doesn't get enough awareness because of that. So what can be done in this situation?
I think it's the part of numbers, really. And I think social media, and I think you'd agree, there's a lot of trolling, etc. But it's also a matter of numbers. If enough people hadn't reshared about the Amazon fires, we wouldn't have known, literally. So it's a power of numbers. So yes, there will be, and remember, like, it's all part of the algorithm. So, the person who's tweeted it or written about it probably has a very different algorithm to yours. So his lived reality is very different. So when he sees your post, it's probably an anomaly of all his other posts, like, it's probably like saying that, oh, why was Nirbhaya out so late? Why was she with a male friend? Should have deserved it. It's her fault. What would the men do if you see a woman like? So if this is the range of posts which are coming, then, and you are writing about, no, it is her right to go out at night and, go wherever. She's not answerable to anyone. People will reply, and people will obviously do it. So it's really a part of numbers, and really it's about spreading awareness. So like, even when I share or retweet or say something, I usually do it when A, I've read about it, and B is like, when I feel like it contributes to somebody knowing about this, So yeah.
Thank you.
Ishani.
Good morning, ma'am. So I wanted to ask that a particular language in the form of verbal or written expression is often exclusive to a country or a community.
Yeah.
So can we still consider the language of resistance to be a global instrument of empathy?
Yes and no. So in the sense that, again, as I said, spoken language, written language is just one form. And yes, for example, let us look at the term tribes. Okay, India uses the term Adivasi. Some other country uses indigenous people. So different countries have different lingo for the same problem, and usually, as I've told you, the problems are usually the same: lack of access to resources, discrimination based on beliefs, or just like historical discrimination which has been continuing, prejudice. So the matter about empathy is that you don't need language to feel empathy. It's something which comes from within, from inside you. So I feel that that is definitely something. So for example, my lingo about Canadian indigenous people may not be absolutely correct, and if I tweet about it, I may stand corrected, about the correct lingo. But that does not diminish my feeling that if I can help in any way, I will. So it's a global feeling of empathy, really. And resistance, again, when we are writing that, there's a certain form of resistance. Like, we can't do anything, we are here, but whatever little we can, we try to do, right? I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am, it does. Thank you so much.
Khushi?
Good morning. I'm not exactly sure if this is like a definite question, but we hear about so many different things going on in the world, and there's so many different uploads about different things like the Black Lives Matter, the farmers, the Dalits, the rape cases. So these are the pretty much these are the things that come into the limelight. We could essentially say that. So my question is that what about the stuff which would maybe probably fall under the same umbrella term, but those cases, like obviously we know that not everything is shown and not everything is spoken about, but obviously it deserves to be because nobody's trauma and nobody's tragedy is more than somebody else's. So I guess my question would be like, we as citizens, I mean, as you said before, it's impossible for somebody to know everything, but I guess media would play a very big part in this. So and even media doesn't cover all of it. So I guess my question would be, what do you think could be done to improve or rectify this?
I think a lot of groups are working on this actually. So you see, obviously, we know the media has its biases, and they're obviously in a space of power, and it is their discretion which report to choose and which report to not choose, right? So essentially then what are we thinking about, what we can do and what has been done? Like I'm very active on Instagram, and there are so many groups on Instagram which, for example, talk about Dalit atrocities which Dalits have faced. So I don't know if you remember this video or this trend of, it was on Facebook first, of reviewing the worst makeup artist in the city. I don't know how many of you watched it, but it was a thing, people would just go online and see who has like a 0.5 star or something and go get their makeup done, and then like it would be like a funny thing. And then what happened, somebody did it for India, I think Delhi or something, and it turns out that the woman who was working there was a low caste woman. And obviously, a lot of people, as you know, the reality in our city, a lot of people who work in our local parlors are not from that affluent kind of, class and caste. So obviously, and knowing things like makeup, access to makeup is a very expensive affair, So there was a lot of outrage. Some people were obviously laughing at it. Oh my God, the makeup was so bad. She didn't know what a primer was, heavens. But other people, groups kind of pointed it out that, this is a lower caste woman who's come all the way from her village. God knows how many things she had to go through to make that journey, to free herself. And then like, it's actually so insensitive and terrible to be doing a trend like this in the first place, because you're overlooking the struggles of people. So I think a lot of social media handles kind of take up these things, and from there it kind of becomes viral, and then newspapers notice somehow. So first, I think the best news first comes on social media, and from there you can kind of go to the other pages. So I think try to find pages, etc., which are run by people of that community, because while digital the internet is expensive, but at the same time it has kind of equalized a little bit. A lot of people do have access to smartphones, etc. It's increasing. So definitely I feel the media sometimes is quite unreliable in getting all kinds of information, and this is perhaps the better way to keep yourself informed and kind of become part of that. If something, if it requires attention, making it viral, and so that people notice it and actually it goes in print, where maybe people like my parents would read it, because they are not on social media. So they also get, because there are so many news like that. How many can you I try to tell my parents every evening that this happened, so bad, but unless you have it in print, so more people can read it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Aishwarya, I am sorry to interrupt here, but we can perhaps, I see a sea of hands in front of me, but we can perhaps take two more, and then we have to wrap up this part of the session.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, Krisha.
So, as an anthropologist right now, obviously, like it does have a lot of challenges because the field has significantly evolved from what it was. So, how do you think that we can apply the knowledge that we get from anthropology today, especially in a world with where everything's changing so fast and even culture is not what it was because it's constantly evolving. So, as an anthropologist yourself, what advice would you give to the youth to better themselves and use the knowledge of anthropology?
I think the best advice would be three things actually. First, read. So before you post, before you like make up your mind about something, read. The second thing, which I feel is extremely important, is be reflexive. You know, put yourself and kind of see. We are all privileged. We're talking in English. We have internet, and we are in this talk today. You know, we are all from cities. We all have so we all have different realities. So kind of first acknowledging our reality and kind of seeing. So when we go as anthropologists to a field site, you know, a lot of field sites that perhaps we go to, people may not know English, etc. So kind of acknowledging that मैं ऐसा हूँ, this is all my privilege, and knowing that very clearly in your head. So I mean, we can't be absolutely objective human beings, but trying to be as objective. So I think that's something the discipline teaches, which is excellent. The third thing the discipline can teach about the world is viewing each case in its own merit. Humans are not the same everywhere. There is two villages side by side may have different social realities because the population are different, the people are different, even if the population, you know, dynamics are the same, the people themselves are different. So kind of understanding, so kind of going into the details. Anthropology is all about the details. So what is really happening here? So like something like economics will look at in terms of statistics and, you know, the larger view, but we really go into the depth that so for example, if there's a development scheme, why didn't it, you know, take off in this village and why did it take off there? Now we go into the root of it and try to mend it. So kind of trying to understand what works, what doesn't work, etc. So I hope these three things are something. So even when it happens, you know, there are so many cases of so many things around the world. So kind of read and try to critically understand that who has it happened to? What is the social reality of that person? How is it different from mine? How can I make sure not to cloud my judgment? You know. So yeah. I'll take Raisha's question, and Sarvottam has personally messaged me, so I will comply. So Raisha, quickly, let's do this.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, so my question was that, so in the past, though the hierarchical system was of the society, it was more prominent, but we can't exactly say that we have gotten rid of it completely. So, and even like we even have social media now, which is a platform where we can reach out to people and help them out, but it is also with a platform which is related to a lot of lack of empathy. So can we really say that people have become more empathetic, or has the degree of empathy remained unchanged?
I think it's personally remained unchanged a lot, but we have been trying to get better. I feel this generation really tries, you know, like to understand, for example, like understanding the difficulties Brazil would have faced, you know, when the Amazon fires happened. I mean, we can't imagine it I'm sitting in Calcutta. So in Calcutta, of a fire of that level, but at the same time, Britain was trying to also, you know, my supervisor all the way in UK was trying to imagine that what happened, you know, when, you know, the Amphan storm kind of hit. And I had exams, you know, right after, so I didn't have internet, etc. So I think we try to be empathetic because we are in a global world. And yes, the social media is a space which is, you know, not the most sympathetic and empathetic, which is very problematic. It is a distinguishing feature, but I think this is. But I think life is also cruel, you know. So I think empathy is a very on purpose act. You're doing it on purpose, and act as in not like drama act, but an act which you're doing, something that you're doing, and you're trying to understand, you're going to get to the as much as you can. And I think that stands for a lot in social media. So while again, it depends on your algorithm where you are. So like I have a mixture of, because of my research, of bloggers, of social activists. So it's very jarring sometimes, but yeah, but kind of trying to also navigate through that with empathy. Yeah. And Sarvottam.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Akshita Priya. I'm from
Oh,
Sarvottam
sorry.
International
I'm
School.
sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Ma'am, my question is, how can we understand that a person in front of us is understanding our words, emotions, or not? And what happens when people, both men and women, interpret our language wrong? And that language can be our body language, that our heels length, our language, our length of the skirt and hair color, and even a smile or a simple hiccup.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't know. So this great anthropologist called Clifford Geertz once said that, sometimes, how our eyelids don't act normal, like sometimes they just close. And so he said that you never know if it's a wink, or if the person is doing it on purpose, or if it's just happening because of some biological tick reaction, So yes, not everybody will understand your language. And I had a lot of problem with that in my life. But I think, for example, expressing it to people, I think requires some practice. I mean, to be honest, I think you'll have to kind of work on your language and just making sure. I think in our head, we kind of say it in some way, but kind of trying to deliver it to other people, I think it requires some practice, some work. However, there will still be people who will misunderstand you. So no matter what you say, people will misunderstand you. I think that is a given. So this not all men, just enough men, this problem, like, men will still feel violated, that just enough men, So some men, not all men, but yeah. But I hope that answers your question. Like you'll never have all the people in a room agree with you or understand you completely, because again, they have a different lived social reality. They'll not be able to perhaps understand all your traversities and trajectories that you've been through in your life, from where you're coming, and perhaps that is where this empathy dialogue needs to kind of increase, and more people need to kind of come into the ambit of it.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So thank you. I do see a lot of hands up still, and we don't want to disappoint you. So why don't you text your questions to us, and we will forward them to Aishwarya, and Aishwarya will get back to you with her responses, because we really need to move into the next segment. So thank you very much, students. Those were amazing questions, all of them. So, and Aishwarya also, thank you. You took us into this deep dive into the diverse languages of resistance, right from discrimination against Dalits to the watershed moment in women's resistance that happened in 2012 to the very recent BLM. And you showed us that without empathy, resistance cannot happen. So thank you, Aishwarya, for your excellent lecture and for your amazing responses to the flood of absolutely brilliant questions that followed it. Thank you so much.
Just one thing, I have my email written on the chat, so I understand a lot of your questions. I'm more than happy to answer everything. So please reach out to me on email if you want to directly talk about it, or if you want any, I kept on saying, readings, I'm more than happy to share them. Thank you very much for the opportunity, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.